This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
This table is really tilted.
Excuse me? Am I gonna get a chance to speak?
Maybe I should take that back.
Denied. Damn, son, where'd you find this?
Take a giant step for mankind.
Welcome to the Tilted Table with your hosts, Sean and Joe.
Folks, welcome to the Tilted Table. Episode 3, cruising along. Look at us. We're killing it. I am Sean Landon Clark.
And I am the Joey Joe, a.k.a. the Fracky Mac.
The podcast that is the answer to the question that nobody asked. All right, so let's start this show off with a question that was posed last week, I think off air. I want to find out, what was the first alcohol that you drank when you drank it or when you started drinking? And give me some background on your first experiences with the good old booze.
I remember that actually like it was yesterday. So I was homeschooled growing up, and I lived out in the country. So I actually didn't have a drink until I was 21. And it was now my wife, but it was my wife's grandpa's birthday at a really nice restaurant. And they brought a bottle of Silver Oak, Alexander Valley, so Napa Cab. And they, everybody had these fancy glasses, and they pour the wine and cheers, Grandpa. And I took one sip, and I'm like, oh, this is disgusting. People pay money for this?
I think it's everybody's first reaction to alcohol. Like, people drink this?
And I literally just poured my glass into, now my wife's glass, and said, you can have this. And I think I ordered like a Dr. Pepper or something.
Okay.
So that was my very first time, and then I went on to become quite the aficionado after that.
Okay. And you drink mainly wine, right? At least historically, that's what you
wine
drink.
And champagne. Yeah.
Wine and champagne. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's vastly different than me because I can't stand wine. And as big of a drinker as I can be, even if my house is completely just devoid of alcohol and there's only wine, I still won't open the bottle of wine and drink it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You're that guy.
Yeah, it's weird because it's not like I haven't had wine, and I'm not actually against wine. Red wine's like an apocalypse would have to happen, and that's all that's left, I think, for me to drink red wine. I'll drink white wine, but even then, I think it has to be like there's just no other choice, and then I'll drink white wine. So
wait, what was your first story?
You said you didn't start drinking until you were actually 21. Legal age. And, for anybody listening, you shouldn't drink until you're 21. Stupid to do it any other time in your life. It's probably stupid to do it after 21, but nonetheless, right? I started drinking when I was about 16. I started playing guitar, playing with, a bunch of guys in bands, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It's, 1989, 1990, 91, 92, in that time frame. And it came kind of with the territory. It also came with weed. I started smoking weed when I was in the 8th grade. So I actually had marijuana before I started drinking. Now, I had alcohol prior to that. Like, I'm Italian, so the customary, glass of wine at dinner, and my dad would, give me some wine or whatever. But the actual idea of sitting down and drinking with the intent that I'm going to drink several, ounces of this stuff, I'm going to catch a buzz, right? The actual idea of drinking was probably about 16. It was after marijuana. And the first beer that we had was malt liquor. So at this point in my life, I didn't have a concept of what malt liquor was versus like beer. It looked like beer and it tastes like beer. To me, it was just beer. And of course, alcohol levels, whether a beer is 4%, 6%, 7%, 9%. And malt liquor typically, I think, hovers around 7 or 8%. So it was Old English 800. And somebody had bought it. And we were just drinking it and had a great time. Like I said, I was in a band. We were just, in the practice room. We're, learning a bunch of songs, playing covers, and drinking and, catching a buzz, and maybe in some cases getting drunk. That's primarily the only thing that I drank for several years at least.
Old English?
Old English, well, any malt liquor, but
Like
Old
King
English.
Cobra and all the whole shebang?
Yeah, well, mostly Old English because this is at the same time that NWA had come out. And despite what people think about, the sort of white stoner kids and the hip hop kids, they crossed over quite a bit. So we, as a bunch of rock and roll guys, we did listen to NWA. I mean, how could you not? It was the same kind of message. We were anti-conformist, fuck the man kind of shit. So we had these rappers that were saying stuff that we actually kind of identified with on that level, not the street stuff, just the sort of like, F authority kind of idea. And they would rap about, 8 Ball, right? And Old English 800. So I think that sort of made me lean towards Old English because it's like you can say like King Cobra, for example. I never heard of King Cobra. So if I'm in a store and I'm getting someone to buy me booze, I'm going to lean to what I know and I understand. So I would always lean towards Old English. The only other one that we really messed with was St. Ides. That's because Ice Cube would rap about St. Ides. So
was Mickey's around in the mix?
No, Mickey's was a couple years after that.
Okay.
And that's an interesting story because it actually ties into something I learned when I was drinking malt liquor. So the main reason I drank Old English or St. Ides and pretty much any malt liquor was because it was cheap. So we could get a 40 of Old English for $2 out the door. So for $4, you could get 2 40s. And that was more than you could drink. You were going to get absolutely slammed on that, right? So for $4, right, just ideal at the time. We didn't have any money. But what I did learn is when we would start playing shows, and again, we're 16, 17, we had yet to start playing like bars and clubs. That wasn't until I was 17, 18, into 19-ish. You'd go to these backyard parties, and again, it's like a high school kegger kind of style thing. There's nobody over 21. Nobody can buy booze. So everyone is kind of just left to their own devices. So people would show up. Somebody might have a 6-pack or a 12-pack, and there's a bunch of people there that can't get their hands on booze. And so it became kind of a grab bag of everybody kind of expecting people to share. So I remember playing this show. I'll never forget this. I remember playing the show, and I had a small cooler, and I had 2 40s of Old English in it. So, I crack one of them before the show. I drink maybe a quarter of it and, put it back in the thing. And no one's seen me do this, right? I'm kind of on I say on stage, but, with all the equipment. So no one's kind of seeing any of this stuff. So we play the show, get done, and we're walking around, just talking to people. And I notice how many people are kind of like, hey, can you get booze? Or we're low. Can somebody get this or that, right? People are trying to figure out how to get more beer. And there was this kid that had a bottle of Southern Comfort, like a 5th of Southern Comfort. And everybody was rolling on him. Hey, can I get a shot of that? Can I get some of that? And he's handing it out. And it's a 5th. Like, he's not going to drink that whole thing. He'd be dead, right? So he doesn't care. So I'm like, yeah, it's going to be that kind of night, right? I'm like, well, it is what it is. So I go back to my cooler behind my amp, and I pull out that 40 of Old English. And like I said, about a quarter of it was gone. And I'm just hanging out. I'm drinking it. And not one person asked me for any of it. No one's saying anything to me. And I was like, whatever. And did
you finish it?
Yeah, I drank the whole thing, and then I got the other 40. And at this point, people are, they're getting drunk, and people are smoking weed, and everybody's partying. I pull out the second one, and I'm talking to this guy, and I just cracked it, and he didn't have a drink in his hand. And this is a white stoner kid, right? And he's like, "Oh, dude, you guys rock! It was great." Da, da, da. And I'm like, "Oh yeah, dude." I said, "You want some? I'll get a glass. I'll pour you some." And he's like, "I ain't drinking that. That's N-word beer." And I'm like, what? And he's like, that's what the N-words drink, right? And I realized that these white kids, they associated that stuff so strongly, and I'm sure because of bands like NWA, that this is what black people drink.
I never knew that.
Right? And so I don't know this for sure. I assume that the reason no one was hounding me for this stuff is they wouldn't drink it because they associated it with people I don't think they particularly liked, or at least a culture that they weren't particularly interested in. Again, this is a bunch of white stoner kids, and I'm sure most of them, if they weren't outright racist, they probably had some, racist inclinations, or at least didn't want to be seen as like drinking, that kind of beer. So I actually enjoyed it more because of that. I'm like, well, great, I'm glad you think it's N beer. More for me. I drank that for a long time. Even when I moved to LA, it wasn't until later I go back to school and start working, and you land a good job. At this point, I had stopped drinking malt liquor primarily because I think, I'm going in my memory, I think I primarily stopped drinking it because I was going to bars more. You know, I had money, and they don't serve malt liquor. But I never had there was never a defining moment where I said like, oh, malt liquor. Well, that's what I used to drink because I was poor. You know, I didn't have any money. I was broke. And now I'm going to drink good beer. At some point in my life, I didn't drink that anymore. I didn't drink any malt liquor.
What about when Bud Ice came out?
So I don't know what year that was. You could look it up. And that was a long time ago. I remember specifically when that came out, I was anti-Bud Ice because I did associate that with, it's basically this like psycho beer, like malt liquor. And, you know, that wasn't good beer. You know, you bought that because you were broke. And like, nah, I got money. I'm not going to buy that or drink that. And it's probably around the time I would assume that microbrews maybe were starting to pick up, and you know, and I started getting into that, you know, and
by microbrews, are you referring to like Four Locos?
That's way after my time. So yeah, it was way after my time. But I'll end the story. This is, I don't know, maybe 2000, let's say 2005, 6, 7ish, somewhere in there. I was hanging out with my brother, and again, my brother was the same. We were all drinking malt liquor. And at this point, you know, we're pushing 30 years old, and we all got good jobs. And you know, we're doing our thing. And I'll never forget this. We're at my dad's house, and he's like, "Hey, dude, let's go to the store and get an Old English 800, just like for old time's sake." And I'm just like, "Seriously?" He's like, "Yeah, let's do it, man." And I think that we already had a couple beers in us, so this is ready to go. And I'm like, "I'm down. Hell yeah!" You know. Again, for a long time, I cheered that beer on, or that malt liquor on. Like, I cheered that on, you know. We go down to the store and we get 2 tall cans of Old English 800. We crack those things. They're ice cold. We take the first swig, and I remember going like, oh, my God, this is absolutely awful. How do we drink this stuff? So that's my malt liquor story. But I want to go back to what you said about Faux Locos. And I'm going to go with the audience. I don't know if they know, Faux Loco was a drink that came out. It was definitely geared towards college kind of kids. And it was liquor with what I assume, I've never had one, but basically kind of an energy drink.
It's basically like 2 Red Bulls and a malt liquor at the same time.
Right. And so, of course, kids are drinking this, and the alcohol is affecting them, but, you know, the energy or the caffeine aspect of it, it's got them lit. So people are getting sick. I don't know if anybody died from Faux Locos, but people did get sick because, you know, typically, obviously, if you drink high amounts of alcohol, your body naturally will just make you pass out. But if you're consuming tons of caffeine or whatever, you're going to probably stay awake. And so people are drinking too much and getting sick. So they banned it, and the company had to recreate it.
Correct. Yep.
And it's still out there, but it's not the same as it used to be. And my question to you was, it seems like every generation has the drink that the government or the people go after because it's this new thing that's deadly. Was there one from your generation? I can think of one in particular, but I'm a couple years older than you, but not by much.
We're talking about beverages. Well, the one that sticks in my head that when it first came out, well, there's a couple that stick in my head, but Zima.
Zima, yes. Remember Zima?
That was kind of like the game changer, or like Smirnoff Ice, like those kinds of
Yeah, it was
things.
the original kind of Smirnoff. It was a malt beverage, and I don't know if it was super high in alcohol, but when you drank it, you couldn't taste any alcohol, and there were people, I remember going to parties where people would chug it. It was like a game to them, right? I'll just do one Zima after another because it was easy to chug. I remember, and if you remember this drink, I want you to tell me what you remember about it. There was a drink that came out called Cisco. It was like a heavy duty wine cooler.
Vague. I know what you're talking about. I never had it though.
Okay, so yeah, it was like, the wine coolers, which was sort of the drink that the dudes would buy for the girls.
Like Bartles and James.
Yeah, like Bartles and James, right?
Yeah.
So it was,
Fuzzy Navel.
Fuzzy Navel, right? So I think most people are familiar with these wine coolers. So Cisco was a wine cooler, but I think it was like 17% alcohol. And even though you could taste it was a bit stronger than like a regular wine cooler, however they crafted that stuff, and I don't know if it goes back to like a Boone's wine or a Mad Dog 2020 type stuff, where it's like you could drink that stuff fast, but that wasn't the thing. It was like people who didn't really drink a lot, which I think typically were either newbies or people who were really kind of like maybe more susceptible to alcohol would get those things. And I'm sure part of it is that they didn't know that it was that strong. Drink 2 of those things and be absolutely upside down. Don't know if anybody died from it, and there was a bunch of stories where people drink 6 or 7 of these things and absolutely, end up going to the hospital because of the amount of alcohol they had consumed. And they went after that and they took it off the market. And I don't think the company tried to rebrand it or retool it. It was just
Faded
gone.
off.
Yeah. So I feel like every generation has a faux loco thing that comes out that young people who are inexperienced drinkers don't know what they're doing, get their hands on the stuff, and frankly it's not like hard liquor. If I can give you the greatest bottle of whiskey ever made, you can't drink it like it's water.
Right.
It's still 40% alcohol. You're going to taste it and you're not going to be able to do it like that. But always those drinks that the alcohol's masked enough or it's sweet enough on one end that people can just chug this stuff.
Well, one of the best days I've ever had in my adult life with my mom and dad was actually July 4th, like 2016-ish. They live out of state. They came into town, and I went to the liquor store to get my dad Coors Light, because that's what he drinks. And as I was opening that little glass door, I looked to the left. I'm like, malt liquor, man, it's been a minute. And I could see, the Mickey's, King Cobra, the Old English. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to get one of each, and I'll just throw them in the ice chest for my old man to take a walk down memory lane. So when my parents got there, I said, hey, Pop, man, I've got like a surprise for you. I open up the ice chest, and he just starts laughing at what I have in there. But it was like, let's try it. So we opened the Bud Ice, and just the smell alone was just so awful that I poured it in the bushes, and my mom was like, you're throwing away money. I'm like, believe me, you don't want any of this. But anyway, I opened the 40 of King Cobra, and it's, to your point, it was ice cold.
Oh, yeah.
I took a sip, and I'm like, it's not that bad.
Okay.
So, it's July 4th in Fresno, California, where it's 9 million degrees.
Oh, yeah.
And between my mom, my dad, and I, we drank the whole thing.
Okay.
Had an awesome afternoon laughing. I woke up the next, I don't know if waking up maybe is too strong. Let's say regained consciousness at 3:00 the next day. And that hangover was the stuff of legend.
Yeah.
I wanted to put a bullet in my own head.
That's, the calling of cheap liquor, right? This is like, if you buy, say a bottle of cheap booze and you're going to wake up in the morning with a massive hangover, but if you would have drank the same amount of top shelf, you're less likely to, or maybe you wouldn't have at all.
I mean, going through like the filtering process, I'm sure your ingredients and your quality is a lot better. It's like when you see one of the like Popov charcoal filtered, and like, man, is that like the briquettes that you put in your barbecue? And they just like
That's what I always thought.
Dump a bunch of alcohol over it, and they're like, look, it's clean.
Yeah, I have a story about, this just reminds me of talking about waking up with that hangover. I was probably 16, 17, 18, somewhere in there. I went out with a couple of friends of mine. We were cruising, trying to pick up girls or whatever. And again, it's the same story, who's got booze. Well, my friend Scott, he had bought some bottles of white port. And I don't know if you know what white port is. Of course, at this, I don't know what it is. It's just a clear wine of some sort, and it's booze. So, let's try it. So, take a sip, and I would, in hindsight, I would compare it to something like a Ripple or a Thunderbird, any of the bum wines, right? But at this time, I don't know anything about bum wines. Like, it's just alcohol. So, we're cruising, going from place to place, and I don't know how many bottles of this stuff I had. And they weren't like regular wine bottles. They were like, in my memory, they're like pint bottles, right? So we're drinking those. I probably had 3 or 4 of these things, and of course I get hammered, right? I wake up the next day, and I've had a lot of hangovers. And when you remember a specific hangover from like 3 decades ago, that's how bad this was. So I get up, I'm sick as shit. I got a headache that's just killing me, and it's bad. And my dad calls me up. So I pick up the phone, and he's talking about whatever he's talking about. I'm like, right? And he's just like, hey, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I went out last night. And he's like, oh, okay, you went out last night. And I go, yeah. And I said to him, and my dad was a big wino, and I'm like, I go, yeah. I go, have you ever heard of white port? And he's all, heard of it, because I got the headache 30 years later. Still got it. And I was just like, oh my God. So yeah, obviously, you know, you learn over time about those things. Well, I have heard, you were talking about King Cobra being, you didn't think it was too bad. Maybe about 5 years ago, a friend of mine had told me he had drank, I don't know which malt liquor it was. And again, from that era with us. And he said he didn't think it was too bad. So maybe they retooled it? Possible?
It's, well, the one thing that, you know, it's such a great topic. And the benefit is looking backwards is, yeah, the moments that you were drinking whatever it was were awesome. The hangover was the stuff of legend, but here we are 30 years later being like, I can remember exactly that one time and how epic it was.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?
Leave a like on the video. I know you're enjoying this. Can you shut up?
The internet's answer to a question that was never asked. The Tilted Table with Sean and Joe.
I actually bought King Cobra within the past year, and you know, when it is ice cold, it's, you know, my wife like teases me. She's like, "Are you gonna say it's not that bad?" I'm like, "No, it's actually not that bad. It's when it comes up an extra 2 degrees in temp that it's just foul.
Yeah,
gross."
Well, I do remember when we had it, that was like a primary kind of rules that like you bought it, you didn't put it in the refrigerator, you stuck that shit in the freezer, and it had to sit there, or you had that thing doused in ice. It had to be ice cold. And when it's a 40 ounce, you know, there was periods where you're drinking like say a quarter of it, you recap it and shove it back in the ice for, you know, 10, 15 minutes.
Yep.
And, you know, let it get back down because you didn't want it to get warm at all.
No.
And so, yeah, I that doesn't surprise me at all. I think that it's probably still the same design. I don't think it's as popular. I can't remember in the last 15 years seeing anybody with malt liquor at all.
I haven't.
Yeah.
Of anybody I've ever heard of or met in malt liquor, it's me that's bought the most.
I'm the guy behind the King Cobra.
Yep.
But yeah,
there's a reason the distribution got expanded here in the Central Valley.
Yeah. Well, again, I mean, you live in an area where, you know, it's affordable. People are going to buy it because they don't have a lot of money. And I think in a place where it does get extremely hot in the summer, I don't care, man, whether that's an ice cold Bud Light or an ice cold malt liquor. You know, when it's hot outside and you're a drinker, you're going to like give me what you got, especially if it's cold. It's hot outside. You're going to do it.
Well, going back to the Smirnoff item and like remembering beverages from once upon a time, in college, I drank a whole ton of Smirnoff Ice. I thought it was the greatest thing ever. I'm like, it's like soda with rocket fuel in it. Well, like later in life, I want to say it was about 2 years ago, I went over to a friend's house and I opened the refrigerator. They're like, "Hey, Joe, just go get something out of the fridge." So I opened the door and I see all of these Smirnoff Ice. I haven't had Smirnoff in 20-something years. I grab one of them. I'm like, "Hey, do you mind if I have this?" They're like, "Yeah, sure. Knock yourself out." I took one sip out of that bottle. I'm like, "Nope." And I poured it down the sink. And like,
wow,
that is, I wouldn't say I have a refined palate, but I know what is terrible.
Right. Mm-hmm. I never got into the Smirnoff Ices or even the Zima when it first came out. I think Zima came out when I was probably around 20. It just didn't appeal to me. I don't know why. I think, and I'm thinking about it right now, I think the stuff like Mike's Hard Lemonade and Smirnoff Ices, I think the biggest problem I have with them is they're just too sugary. I don't mind them. They taste good. I can have one, but that's not something I can drink back to back to back. And typically when I drink, it's like I'm going to grab a 6-pack or a 12-pack of something, and I'm going to probably clown 7 or 8 of those beers. So yeah, there's no way that I can do that with Smirnoff. So even again, if it's a situation where it's the only thing available, I probably would have one, but I would never buy it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would never buy it.
Oh, speaking of volume, and then we can switch gears, but it's whenever I hear someone drinks a cube by themselves, it always blows my mind how one human being can ingest that kind of volume of something.
I have known a lot of people, especially a lot of my friends, that these dudes, they'll get off work and they'll buy a 24-pack and they'll kill it. Not by themselves. It's usually one other person. I've always counted my beers, like or how many drinks I've had, I can't go much beyond about 7. At that point, I'm actually pretty drunk. Depending, I guess, what kind of a drunk you are, whether you could be the loud, obnoxious drunk or the violent drunk, I am very much a lush. So the more I drink, the more I slow down. So by 6, 7 beers or drinks, whatever it would be, I'm not the guy jumping up and down like, yeah, let's go. I'm falling asleep. I want to go to bed. So I don't think I have the makeup to do that. Yeah, I can't imagine drinking a 12-pack of beer. Maybe the only circumstance I could even conceive that could happen is like, I don't know, maybe I'm doing a bunch of work outside and it's like noon and I crack a beer while I'm doing that work. And over the span of like 10, 11, 12 hours, oh shit, I drank a 12-pack of beer, but going out and we're going out to party, we're going out to drink, no way. I would, after about 6 drinks, I'm pretty much, ready to, fall asleep.
What about the champagne of beers, Miller High Life?
I'm glad you brought Miller High Life up because I was thinking about this before you even showed up. See, we're like connecting like in that way.
Simpatico?
Yeah, simpatico. Miller High Life, Miller in general is considered cheap beer. I think it falls in the same kind of categories like Pabst Blue Ribbon and Olympia. You remember Olympia? Yeah.
Yep.
So these, do you remember Hams?
I do.
Right. So
they had that weird
Panda.
The weird tab thing that you would open.
Right. Yeah. I'm thinking you're taking the tab. I'm thinking about the Panda. They had like a cartoon panda as their mascot. Or Stroh's had a dog like a mascot. So all these sort of cheap beers. So Miller falls into that category. I love Miller High Life. I think it's a great beer, but I can't get away from the fact that I don't think I've met one person that's ever agreed with me on that. That's like, it's the worst beer. Why do you drink that stuff? I don't drink it that often, but when it comes down to it, especially if, I don't got a lot of money on me, hell yeah. And sometimes even when I got money on me, it's like I could buy a 12-pack of like, say, 805, which I love 805. And right now it's about $17, $18 for a 12-pack. And right next to it is a 12-pack of Miller for like $4.99. Oh, the champagne of beers looks pretty damn good. I'll take that. I like Miller High Life, but most Miller products I like Miller Lite. I like it above Coors Light and Bud Light. But again, all my friends, everyone I meet, they think that like, why would you drink that over a Bud Light or a Coors Light? I like it. They don't. No one does. So whatever Miller's doing at the factory, apparently they've caught my attention. I'm a big fan of Miller.
What about some of the bottom shelf liquor like Kessler?
My only experience with Kessler is when I was in my late teens, a bass player that was in my band, he would buy Kessler. Smooth as silk. I remember the tagline on the bottle. And again, during that time, we didn't have a concept of what was good liquor, what was bad liquor. I think we often looked at liquor based on labels. So, if the label looked fancy enough, it couldn't be that bad. And Kessler, if you look at the label, it's got like some old guy on it. I guess. Yeah,
it's like the yellow maroonish label. The only reason that Kessler sticks out in my mind is right out of college, I rented a house, and next door to the house, it was a Hells Angels clubhouse.
Okay.
And it was Rick, Steve, Dale, and brother Keith were the dudes that lived there, and I always wanted to stay on their good side, and the way of staying on their good side was buying them bottles of Kessler.
That's what they like.
That's what they liked.
Okay.
So, when my buddies would come over, I'd get something else, but I wanted to make sure that I kept the peace in the neighborhood and they weren't trying to break into my house.
Sure.
When I was sleeping.
I think that liquor is definitely, it's going to be based on taste. I think that there are liquors that most everybody would consider being rot gut. Like you were saying, pop-off vodka. I think it comes in a plastic bottle. Like, I don't think anyone, I'd be surprised if anyone's going to say like, oh, pop-off, that's, that gets a bad rap. No, I don't think anybody's saying that. So when you get those like lower tiered shelf liquors, yeah, it's going to be a taste thing. And I don't know how much people judge it on the cost. So Kessler's cheap, so it must be bad, which makes sense. But I've also had, I don't know which one's the Johnny Walker Blue.
The blue is their top shelf.
Right. So a buddy of mine, when he graduated college, his brother bought him a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue. And we all was like, whoa, fuck, right on. This is going to be some good shit, right? So they had that moment where the homies got together. It's just, there's dozens and dozens of people at this party. Let's just get the homies together in the room. we're all going to pour a shot of Johnny Walker Blue and we're going to toast graduation. We did that. I took a shot of it. It was good. Nothing again. It's good, but it did not blow me away. Like, it wasn't like, wow, this is way better than like Jameson or, other whiskeys I've had that I would consider at least mid to top shelf product. So yeah, I think that my thought is I think most people are very clear on what's the worst. I don't think anyone's going to debate that. But I think we start getting to that mid tier. I think it becomes a matter of taste. When I was growing up, Jack Daniels, from my perspective, was considered really good whiskey. All the rock stars drank it. It was the most popular. How can this not be good? It's not dirt cheap, but also it's not $100 a bottle, right? Right. So the first time I had Jack Daniels, I thought it was fine. Like, yeah, it's pretty good whiskey, I guess. It's whiskey. It's just it's 40% alcohol, and nobody's drinking this, because it's the flavor is so amazing. The amount of people I've met that think Jack Daniels is just shit fucking whiskey, I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it. And so I don't think it has a good reputation. It's popular.
Yeah, I think we're living in a different time and place. So where things that are craft and custom and small batch and bespoke, those are the liquors that everybody gravitates towards. So the volume producers can still be putting out a good product, but it's like, it's not niche. So people will talk down about it. Yeah. So I'm not a whiskey drinker, so it's never something you'll see me buying, but sure, I don't think it's bad.
I don't know, maybe because I feel like Jack Daniels, it was like the two bottles of whiskey. It was Jim Beam and Jack Daniels seemed to be kind of the ones that were around a lot.
And Wild Turkey.
And that's another aged 8 years. It says on the bottle it's aged 8 years. How bad could it be?
How or where or in what?
But I remember Jim Beam got all the heat. Like, that's crappy whiskey, and if you want good whiskey, you drink Jack Daniels. And I think as I became an adult, I found out how many people who were, whiskey drinkers, they looked at Jack Daniels as being pretty much kind of garbage. And, the same with Jim Beam. But when I was growing up, it seemed to be like, well, there's good whiskey, that would be Jack Daniels. And then there was the less thans, your Kesslers, your Jim Beams, and of course, the famous Wild Turkey, aged 8 years. It says it on the bottle. I remember one time on the bottle, like, how can that be bad? It's been aged 8 years. And then the first thought in my head was, and this is my nerdy side, I've always had a big nerdy side, if it's aged 8 years, what did this company do for the first 8 years in existence?
Of course you would think for something like that.
It's like, it could put out a product for at least 8 years. So what were they doing? Just aging this and hoping the business stays afloat for 8 years until they get their first batch out?
Man, it's probably they had like the first couple runs, and then it was like, oh, we need something fancier and cooler and more limited edition. So,
but I think it says that on every bottle. At the time, I'm sure it was.
Let's drain the bathtub and put it in a bottle and call it aged 8 years.
I think when I became an adult, I kind of judged the quality of booze based on whether it was available at a bar. It's like they had all the bottles back there, and if you go to a bar, you're gonna find your Jamesons, you're gonna find your Tullamore Dews and these types of whiskeys. You're not gonna find Kessler. No, it's not there. You're not gonna find that. You're not gonna find Old Crow. It ain't there.
Or Southern Comfort.
So yeah, I think that.
Or what's the other one? Black Velvet.
I never had Black Velvet. It looks like crap. Like, this is a cheap label looking. Isn't that is that in a plastic bottle?
I've seen it in a glass one, but it's always like you can tell the manufacturing is subpar because the labels are even kind of wonky on the front of the bottle and whatnot.
Looks like somebody just got a sticker and just pasted it.
Like, how cheap can we make this?
Right. Yeah, and they have all those kinds of things, like whatever they use for like Smirnoff seems to be like a popular vodka. And the other one, New Amsterdam, they got 1 million bottles and all these flavors. And I just think that, like, you go to a bar, you're not going to find New Amsterdam sitting on a shelf. It might be used as a but it's not going to be used as an actual thing somebody would order. So that's how I at some point, I kind of judged liquor. But I think going back to the Johnny Walker Blue, I think at some point there's a mid to upper tier. And I think when you go beyond that, a lot of it is marketing. Maybe we use better ingredients and we use a quadruple filtration, whatever the hell they do. It's been aged since, George Washington walked the planet, whatever. I don't think it tastes so much better, or not taste, but I don't think it's so much smoother that it warrants an extra $100, $200 a bottle. I'm not buying that is that much better. It's like, I'll give an example, Absolute, which at one point was, I think, considered kind of an upper tier. Same with Kettle One.
Or Sky
Right.
at one point.
Right, kind of slightly upper tier, but then over time it gets relegated down to like a lower tier. Now, I think Absolute is basically a mid-tier vodka, and I think Absolute's fine. And if I buy a $25 bottle of Absolute versus buying a $300 bottle of some, crazy craft, vodka, is it really worth another $275? And I'm going to say no. Now, is Absolute better than Pop-Off? Like, am I willing to pay an extra even 10, 15, 20? Of course. I'd actually pay an extra $70 to ever have to drink Pop-Off vodka. But I think when you get to a certain point, it becomes taste. And I think it's the same with craft beer. People will sit there and they will argue with each other about this is better than that, and this is better than that. And they're going to have their arguments based on, I think, a lot of marketing and a lot of flash. A lot of sizzle, but no steak when it comes down to it, right? Like, do you know how this is made? Do you know how long this is aged? Do you know what they age it in? It's in this funky little weird barrel that, is only one tree on the planet that produces this wood, and they created a barrel out of it. Like, they have these weird stories like that, and I'm just like, I'm sorry to tell you that if that's a $300 bottle of vodka, I'd rather have a $40 bottle of vodka, and I think it's just as good. But that's me, somebody else would differ.
So one of the, two other things popped in my head earlier when you mentioned alcohols that used to be a thing and then you don't hear about it anymore. Number one, Hypnotic.
I remember Hypnotic, never had it.
Hypnotic they actually have at just totally Vini Vidi Vici. And and Cookie and I walked in the door. It was right when they opened, and I'm like, "Whoa, you actually have Hypnotic? Can you make me a cocktail? I haven't had that in 20 something years." And it was terrible. So it's terrible. And the other one,
you should have never had it. You ruined it. You had like these great memories with it, and you just killed it.
Some chapters are better left in the past.
That's right. I'm 100%.
And speaking of better left in the past, obviously when you're younger, you don't know what you don't know. And then I remember, I could buy alcohol, and I went to the store, and I'm like, ooh, this bottle has gold flakes in it. It must mean it's really good.
Oh, I got a story about Goldschlager. I got a great story.
See, that's one of those like hard pass. I just even see that bottle out of my peripheral, and I just run the other direction.
Yeah, that was popular. That's a Goldschlager. I don't know what it is. It's not a vodka, but it's a cinnamon flavored. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had
like a schnapps or something.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. It has to be like a schnapps. God, I'd never liked schnapps. I always thought that was a weird thing to do. People had like root beer schnapps and peppermint schnapps. Oh, God.
Gross.
So somehow I avoided that nightmare. I didn't avoid the white port nightmare, but somehow I avoided the schnapps nightmare. A group of friends of mine, every year we would buy each other bottles of booze. It was easy. I don't have to think about what, my friend, Josh wants or what Brian wants. We just would buy some top end bottle and, pass it around. And there you go. Merry Christmas. And someone bought me a bottle of Goldschlager. It was during the height of it. And yeah, the whole thing had gold flakes in it. And it was hot. Like people were drinking this stuff. I think it had the same kind of thing like Fireball has had.
Yep.
Where everybody's into this stuff. I never had it. So I remember opening it and I took like half a shot and I didn't like it. Cinnamon, it's not my thing. So I got this bottle of liquor sitting on a shelf for weeks, months, maybe a year. And I'm sitting there going like, well, what can I do with this? So this is still pre-internet days. And, now I guess you could look up like, well, what can you do with Goldschlager? What do you mix it with? What kind of drink can you make with it? So it was probably early evening. And I'm just like, you know what? It's cinnamon flavored. Why don't I make a cup of coffee and pour it in some coffee, like cinnamon flavored coffee? It's Goldschlager sweet. It made sense to me. So I'm like, I'm going to try this. So I make a cup of coffee and I pour some Goldschlager in it, and it had to be the most disgusting thing I've ever consumed.
Oh,
it made sense on paper. It made sense on paper, but no further than that. And again, I've mixed liquors together that didn't work. When you're young and you don't know. I still remember how god awful that tasted, and it baffled me. It's like it's cinnamon flavored. It's coffee. Like, how could this be bad? and I ended up taking the bottle and I just fucking poured it out. Like, I'm not going to drink this shit, and I'm clearly I'm not going to find anything to mix it with.
I'm dying over here, man. I just had a great mental picture of the whole thing. Man, that's like, do you drink it or do you degrease the brakes on your car with it? It's one of the two.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the whole marketing kind of thing. It had gold flakes in it, and I guess it made it fancy. I don't know how expensive Goldschlager was. It wasn't an expensive liquor. Probably $30 a bottle, $25. It's a mid tier kind of thing. But yeah, I don't even think I don't think it's even sold anymore. Do they even sell that?
I haven't seen it. I'm sure somewhere, somehow, but yeah, I haven't seen it.
No,
that's a very, very niche market.
Well, it's again, I think it's, they put stuff out there with the intent that they think it can catch fire, right? Like they'll put out all, these companies, they make so many brands or whatever, they're just going to put something out there and see if it hits. I mean, look at Fireball, which I think Fireball is absolute shit. But go to a bar today and, there's people usually in their 20s, often females, Fireball, Fireball. And I'm just like, God damn, how can you drink that? It's disgusting. Mm-hmm. But, I guess maybe Goldschlager just missed the boat by a decade or two, and people have been, sucking that up.
Oh, man. So many years of great memories and terrible things.
Man, they're all great memories. I just wish I could remember most of them.
Facts. Absolute facts, man. It's the whole thing. Remember that one time? And you're like, no,
don't remember that.
Not at all. I remember I woke up with one shoe.
How did I get here? Who are you people? What state am I in?
I have an important announcement for you, so stay tuned.
Yo, that's some next level shit, bruh.
So you got me. Big deal.
The internet's answer to a question no one asked. The Tilted Table with Sean and Joe.
Well, folks, we want to thank you for joining us for episode 3 of the Tilted Table. I'm going to go out and get some Goldschlager and some White Port. See if I can make it to episode 4.
I think I'll swing by and get a King Cobra on the way home.
All right, folks. I am Sean Landon Clark.
And I'm Joey Joe, the Fracky Mac.
Until next time.
Peace.
Peace.